Over to you.
Great, great. Thank you very much, Debbie. It's just great to be on these sessions, and thank you everybody for coming on. I hope you're having a fantastic time wherever you are in the world. I hope I can add a little bit of value to this already great conversation. And I'll try and do that by telling a story. And I want to make sure it's a good story, right? So the way that you can make sure something is a good story is if you lean on an archetype, a story archetype. If you like romance novels or romance movies, one of the archetypes that you might be familiar with is called boy meets girl. I'm going to borrow a similar archetype for my story. Hope that it is a good story. But the archetype I'm going to borrow is called the hero's return, or otherwise known as the hero's journey. And just to tell you a little bit about that archetype, so that you can almost know what you're in for. I hope so. Is we talk about the hero's journey. We talk about this guy at the top up here, this hiking little chap. He's our protagonist, and he is in the kingdom, and all is well in the kingdom. And he comes across, he's just going about his life, and he comes across some cataclysmic event, some earth-shattering challenge that he doesn't rise up to. He's found wanting, he fails that, and he leaves the kingdom in shame, off to trials and tribulations, morose, and finds a mentor along the way maybe, and gets to the bottom of that battle, which is, stares deep into his soul. And there he finds his source of power. And usually the source of power is like a father figure. If you watch the movie Star Wars, it's Luke Skywalker meets Darth Vader. But in that, there's a revelation of what it will take to overcome this that cast you out of the kingdom. And so the source of power gives you this truth, and then he goes off and changes himself, trains and transforms. He now knows what he needs to do to challenge this demon, and then he gets to a point where he's ready. He returns to the kingdom, vanquishes the demon, hailed a hero, and we live happily ever after. So that's what I'm going to aim for in terms of my story. It's going to be a hero's journey. So what kind of story can I tell that can put South Africa as a hero, especially in the times that we're in now? And just like our hiker up there, we got to start our story in a very good place. When all was well in the kingdom. We're going to cast our minds back to a time before now, 2020, which was 2019. I know during the New Year's resolutions we said, yo, what a tough year. But where we find ourselves now, that was the good old days. 2019 was the dream. We were damn near gods. And when I say we were near gods, we had mastered almost everything, right? First industrial revolution, we had come up with mechanisms of producing abundance of food and stuff. And then in the second industrial revolution, we got to manage labor, and we democratized economy itself, and everybody got to partake in the prosperity, or at least middle class did. And then we went into the third industrial revolution. We went back to the very machines, and we started using them to solve complex problems. And that's where we came up with computers, and we started using that. And then we find ourselves at the cusp of 2019, at the probably the apex of our achievement, starting to master our digital world. We heard Stafford talking about artificial intelligence. We were now starting to build in these things called algorithms to a point where we can land in a city that we've never ever been, and we can hire a car in that city, and then we can take our phones out and spin up one of these algorithms, usually called Waze or Google Maps, and it will make us drive around with the knowledge as if we were a local, probably even better than a local. So that's the gods that we had kind of become, masters of this digital world. So what could go wrong? What could be this cataclysmic event? Yeah, that happened. And so COVID, what it found was a chink in our armor. What COVID was able to find was to zone in on an area that when we tried to defend, we found ourselves wanting, and we had to disappear, we had to run away. We came up with constructs to try and deal with this social distancing lockdown, and off we went, and we said, okay, we're going to stay away from each other, but we're going to stay connected, and we'll kind of keep in touch. And when it comes to our mechanisms of production, our economy, we'll just do this thing called work from home, and we'll be able to at least keep the economy going. And the reality, unfortunately, for most of the globe and the emerging economies, is social distancing needed capital. We don't have the kind of money where we can stockpile a lot of things. So even in social distancing, we find ourselves going out to have to buy food. We live in places that look like this or are just a little bit better than this, that don't have the kind of refrigeration that means we can social distance forever. We can't work from home in these conditions, and even worse, we can't home school when it comes to the South African state. So we turn to our mentor, President Cyril Ramaphosa, coming out and saying, I'm going to do some quantitative easing, which he did at the beginning. We turned to captains of capital. They gave $1 billion or $2 billion and to try and ease the situation, but that didn't help. We still landed up in junk status. We lowered the interest rates after that. We've known to do that move, but our economic outlook was still looking down. On a lighter side, we found that people are very addicted to alcohol, started breaking into bottle stores and hijacking KWV vans. But on the more serious side, this Gini coefficient that we have, which is the difference or the measure of the difference between the haves and the have-nots, has been the worst in South Africa and continues to be so in these conditions. It has resulted in 29% unemployment. A friend of mine, Walter Dare, usually says, we have an unemployment rate that is worse than the Great Depression back in the 20s. That was at 27%. And another friend of mine is an economist, says we're probably going to lose more jobs, about 1.5 to 2 million jobs, meaning that our unemployment rate will move to about 35%. And that's at its best. And we haven't really dealt with two root causes that come out of such a disparate Gini coefficient, which is the xenophobia. I'm afraid we're going to see flare-ups of that, and violent crime. But we turn back to our mentor and we say, help us out. And he goes back to kind of the things he's done before, which is like infrastructure projects, a way of fiscal stimulus. And for the first time, we saw President Ramaphosa come in with an actual fiscal stimulus of injecting actual cash into people's hands to try and get the economy going. And when we get to the abyss, when we get to the bottom of the barrel, I think what caused this cataclysmic event, what we need to realize is it's not our inability to master capital. It's not our inability to master economics. It's not the IMF who's our father figure. It's not BRICS who's our father figure. It happens to be Mother Nature. And why I say that, and a lot of the speakers who spoke just before me touched on it, is about sustainability. Because you see, what we were good at is we got the highest connection rate ever in the history of humanity. We have never been so more connected. We've got the highest distribution of capital, or just capital generation. We've got trillion-dollar companies. But what we neglected and we fell foul to is what they call the tragedy of the commons. And that's a game theory that says, quite simply, if I go and I use the environment to make some money, economics, and you go to the environment and you make some money, and we don't do that collaboration, that talking about the environment, and we don't watch how much we take from the environment, we get to a point where it cannot recover itself, it cannot renew itself before we take from it, and eventually that environment is destroyed. And I think that's kind of what's happened, and that's the fall apart when we talk about this sustainability. And that's what COVID found with us. It found us not very resilient when it came to our physical. So we were able to improve our quality of life, and probably at the highest level ever, but it found a chink in our physical world, which is just our life in general. And so now that we've been to our father figure, our Mother Nature, we now know what we need to train, we know what we need to transform, we know what we need to get on with in terms of our journey to get back to our kingdom. But there's a couple of realities that we have to look at. What COVID found was it exploited our connectivity, or our connectedness. And what we did as a countermeasure is we did social distancing and work from home. But if you look at the second bullet, or the second word up there, financial services, that's probably the only industry in South Africa that can sustainably work from home. For a number of industries, be it community all the way to transport, we cannot work from home. In fact, 61% of our people have no remote work ability. And so when we train and transform ourselves, we need to keep this in mind, that we need to go back to this environment and treat it a little bit better. The second problem that we run into is what is called the innovator's dilemma. If you've ever come across Clayton Christensen, who unfortunately passed away beginning of this year, he is known for writing this book, Innovator's Dilemma, and we get those words, disruptive innovation, from him. But the essence of it says that when a cataclysmic event happens, people's needs change. And what a producer of products and services needs to do is he needs to improve his products and services to meet those new needs. But his products and services usually serve mainstream and also serve a low market. And in terms of the world, mainstream is developed world, in case you missed it, and low market is emerging world, and that's us, in case you missed it. So what this company is going to do is they're going to try and improve their product so that they can serve mainstream, and they can't improve their product to serve both mainstream because the product performance goes up. And so we will be found wanting. We as much as we're getting all the great donations, we're getting PPEs, etc. When we get out of lockdown, when we get out of COVID, we'll find ourselves in a world that is trying to improve products for the mainstream, and we can no longer afford those mainstream products. So what I argue that we need to do as we train ourselves is we need to look at the other side of the coin of that innovator's dilemma and use mechanisms that reduce the cost of production so that we can produce things that can improve our quality of life, but for the low market, just satisfies our needs. And one of the things that we can use there is technology. And whenever we say use technology, we usually say digitize the thing, take advantage of Moore's law. And so I say we should digitize, but not just anything. Let's go back to this lesson that we need to learn, because the thing we have to fight is the environment, or the thing that we have to understand is the environment. So it's all about the commons. So we need to digitize our ability to use the commons in a way that is more, I think Stafford used the word ecosystems, where we start talking to each other about how we are exploiting the environment, but in a sustainable way. And what we do at SquidNet is we use one of these technologies called Internet of Things. It would be a sad story if I didn't explain to you and tell you everything that I know about the Internet of Things, which is in one slide, I hope, which is really the Internet of Things is A, B, C, D. It's about a human being who wants to improve his quality of life. And the only way that he can do that, or one of the ways that he can do that, is make better decisions about his environment and assets in his environment. And so the ABCD stands for the class, the phone that we carry, so that they can see an application. That application interacts with the big data that we have in the cloud, some kind of wireless connectivity that gets to a sensor that we attach onto our commons. And when we talk about commons, we're talking about water or electricity, or sometimes just our logistics or the ways in which we produce our goods and services. And what we're trying to get is this remote visibility so we can take actionable insight. We want to get an early warning that things are going into distress, or we want to see everything, make sure that it's working, or we just want to know who our top worst drivers are, so that we can give them some training so that they can drive a little bit better and consume a little bit less fuel. And that's IoT. Now you know as much about IoT as I do. But back to the story, we have to go back and face this demon called COVID. And I think that, for me, is the interesting thing, is when we return into the situation, what we have to do is we have to not just attack COVID, but attack why COVID was successful in finding this chink in our armor. And in the African context, it's because it is about the commons themselves, and why we need to address these commons is they are about improving our quality of life. And another way I can say improving quality of life is increasing our life expectancy, because what we find in South Africa pre or post COVID is that we have been sitting on a life expectancy at about 63 years old, and we want to leapfrog, just like the East Asian countries did, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan. They were able to advance their life expectancy to one of parity with the developed world, to a point where we now consider them part of the developed world. So for us, what will be the vanquishing of the demon is not necessarily about COVID, but more about how we master the physical world as much as we master the digital world, and one where we don't exploit our natural resources, our environment, to a point where it can't renew itself. So I hope that's a good news story. And
thank you very much.